I wanted to ask, you mentioned something earlier. First of all, for my money, you're one of the great guitar heroes of the 1980s and beyond. I know people like to lump things into convenient boxes, but every time I hear
enough credit, Tracii.
Every time I hear a discussion about guitar heroes from the 80s, I always hear George Lynch and Warren DeMartini, and that's all fine and good. But for my money, you're my guy. So, and I know you're a Randy Rhoads guy and an Eddie Van Halen guy. So my question is, when you're in the studio, how many takes do you do of a solo? Are you a guy that seeks perfection, or do you value spontaneity and finally say after maybe 5 takes, I'm just going to pick the best one, otherwise I'm going to, over-examine this thing to death?
It really depends on the song, doesn't it? And, when we talk about 80s guitar heroes, I think that Warren and George really define the sound, you know what I mean? Like that sound, right? Whatever that sound is, it's a sound. And it's a great sound, So for me, like, I'm just the best me, right? Like most of my shit comes from the 60s, sounds like the 70s, recorded like modern, right? So it's an evolution. Underrated is a strange thing to say from somebody that loves me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
he got you, Dave. He got you.
He got me.
So I don't think I'm underrated. I think that we have our fan base based on a lot of psychological factors, and but yeah, I don't feel underrated. Sometimes it's a little embarrassing, to be honest. It's like, yeah, I know I can play a pentatonic scale. You know what I mean?
I guess my point was just that when people have the conversation that your name is not mentioned in the same breath, and I think that's criminal, because to me, I think you're one of the best. And I think what I like, going back to your point, I think George and DeMartini sort of, I view them now. I'm not a guitar player. I'm just a listener. But to me, they're more rooted in the technicalities of it all. And you, I feel like you're more of a bluesy, a little bit more punk rock. There's something darker and sleazier about your style of playing that I appreciate maybe more than the sterile noodly stuff,
Right. And I don't think, I'm a guitar player, right? So I know, George and Warren are very Siamese twins, like there's back then, they really were doing something cool. And what really defines them is their sound. Their sound is consistent. They don't fuck around. It's like I sound like George, I sound like, Warren, where someone like me, sometimes I sound like Carl Perkins, you know what I mean? Sometimes I sound like Johnny Thunder. Sometimes I sound like Randy. Sometimes I sound, I used all my influences.
Perfect. Yeah.
Instead of focusing on, this is my thing. I don't really care so much about it. And I know what you mean in the conversation, but then there's always the asshole in the corner of the room. Tracii Guns, man, you guys are idiots. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those are my people, right?
Yeah.
The guys in the corner, they're like, you know what the fuck you're talking about,
Yeah.
And I'm good with that. I like those guys.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the work you did on the Randy Rhoads documentary. I heard, I think I read somewhere that Slash was the first guy that told you Randy Rhoads is going to be your new favorite guitar player.
That's right.
Is that right?
Hold on.
So Slash turns you on to Randy Rhoads. Tell me about how that went, and then tell me about the first time you got to see Randy perform because of that recommendation, and then segue into your recent narration of the documentary.
All right. I never saw Randy play, which sucks.
Me neither.
Totally sucks. So
me neither.
I'm waiting outside electronic shop class in. It was either 7th or 8th grade. I guess it was 10th grade. And Slash comes right up to me. It's, 8 a.m. or whatever. And he's like, hey man, I'm like, what? Oh, I saw fucking Ozzy last night at the Forum. And this guy, Randy Rhoads, that's going to be your new favorite guitar player. He played like this, like you, instead of like this, whatever. That's my best, 16-year-old Slash voice. Sorry.
Pretty good.
and I'm like, oh yeah, really? Oh, cool, man. And I just thought he was tricking me because he was a prankster. And so, but he was serious. He goes, yeah, you met, the guy on the Starwood, the picture of the blonde hair guy on the Starwood. I'm like, oh yeah, quite right, guy. And I'm like, and Ozzy played by himself? And he goes, yeah, he has a solo career. I didn't even know what a solo career was then. I'm like, oh, so it wasn't Black Sabbath? That was kind of my thing. So I go surfing with my dad that weekend, and Crazy Train came on the radio, and I knew immediately. I knew that was who Slash was talking about. And I became obsessed. He was right. Like holy shit, this guy, wow. I never heard anything like it. And I was such an Eddie Van Halen fan. And this was so different. A lot of people compare him to Eddie, but he's not. Randy was like this.
I don't hear it. Yeah, I don't hear it.
Yeah, I don't hear it either. It was really more of this Mick Ronson kind of mixed with Gary Moore, and then that live sound and the studio sound, just like, Randy's soul really comes through the guitar. And so I just spent my whole life obsessing over him the same way I do over Page. Those two guys, it's just, there's so much mystery in the sound, right? There's so much mystery there. It's like, what is this? You
think Randy might be a little bit more classical than Eddie?
I don't think so. I'll tell you musically what's going on there. Randy wrote from a major scale way of thinking, which it sounds really bizarre because that shit's so dark, right? It's so dark. But within those modes of the major scale, he created that music, which a lot of times it is minor and very, neoclassical sounding.
Yeah, Sabbath is minor and Crazy Train is major until it gets to the F sharp pre-chorus.
That's right.
And when you think about that bass line, beep, 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 that's Joy to the World.
It is. Yeah. So, you're absolutely right. And, Richie Blackmore did the same shit, in Deep Purple. And it does come across as classical music. Now, the myth about Randy was that he was an accomplished classical player, writer, composer. He was on his way there. But when he was doing the Ozzy stuff, he was not there. He was pure Randy Rhoads in learning mode, stretching his knowledge to the max, and creating atmosphere, which is why he's so fascinating. He's so young. People forget that, no, he wasn't a 35-year-old accomplished musician yet. He was 22 years old. Think about that for a minute, and he gave guitar lessons. He took some lessons from some people at the Musonia, the school, but he wasn't accomplished. He wasn't, which is great. One of the things that Steve Vai always says, when he's giving advice is like, you don't need to know music. If you can make happen what you hear in your head, that's all that counts. It's getting to what you hear, getting it here. That's all that matters. So get this. I'm hanging out with Brad Gillis, and he always brings up all kinds of great stories, and he's such a fun guy to hang around with. But I asked the question. I'm like, okay, dude, you had 4 days to learn all the Randy stuff, so like, how did you know about like the diminished scales and all this stuff? And he just told me flat out. He goes, you know what? I really don't know much about music or how scales work or anything like that. He goes, I just picked it out by ear. I'm like, you picked that out by ear? You know, like I can't do that. I've never been able to. I mean,
Wow.
you know, I was 14 years old and I was still playing Heartbreaker like this. What was I doing? I remember Slash laughing at me. I was like that.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because that's just what it sounded like in my head for some reason.
You were playing it percussively as much as a guesstimation. Yeah.
Right. Always, you know, so like even when I was learning Randy or learning Page or Hendrix, you know, it's always my interpretation. You know, I don't have that ear that can pick out things exactly, you know, like that. And then I'm much better now because I do have a very big musical education now. So I know better, like, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's not right. You know, which helps. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's all a mystery. And, you know, guys like Vi, who has this, he hears all the music in his head and composes it, then plays it. Like that fascinates me. Brad Gillis learning a whole Ozzy set without having any knowledge of music, that fascinates me. You know, I mean, there's just wizards all over the place.
Yeah.
These guys, wizards.